Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Wi-Fi and Mobile Security How Safe Are You workshop, presented by our speaker, Josh Susan. My name is Ebony West, and I will be your breakout room host this morning. I have a few housekeeping items to review, and then we'll begin and get right into our wonderful presentation. First, all participants' mics and cameras should remain off for the entire duration of our presentation to minimize any potential distractions. If you have any questions or any comments throughout the presentation, please utilize the chat feature to submit those questions. Our speaker will address those questions at the end of his presentation. Please note, we are recording this session as well as the other available workshops. These recordings will be available for on-demand viewing on FSCJ's website later this month. Finally, the best way for you to view today's session is in speaker view. You can change your view settings by selecting the view option that's located in the upper right-hand side of your video. You can make that selection there. Now, I'd like to take a moment to introduce our speaker. Josh Susan is the Director of IT Security at Formative Health. Josh has worked in the banking and healthcare sector since 2004. His early career began in programming, then in system administration, moving into leadership roles over time that have a greater focus on cybersecurity. He's currently the Director of IT Security at Formative Health, and he's a certified information system security professional. He also runs his own company. It's called InfoShield. His company, InfoShield, is helping other companies remain secure and compliant. Without further ado, I introduce to you Director Josh Susan.
Thank you, Ebony, for that introduction. Get my video started here, share my screen out. Give me just a minute. All right. Ebony, let me know if it's not coming through.
No, sir, it's visible. We can see it just well.
Perfect. All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Really appreciate your time this morning and going through this with me. So we're going to be talking about Wi-Fi and mobile security, two different topics that blend pretty well and we use on a day-to-day basis now with so much of our business and home use, personal use. It's just everywhere. And so these are some good topics to go through. We're going to talk about what you can do to try to make yourself as secure as possible. Some good practices for both of these from could be from really your personal or from a business standpoint. Quick little bio slide here. Ebony helped me with the introduction and covered a lot of these, so I won't go through them all again. But couple of things. I've been working with computers for quite a while in the regulated industry, particularly for also quite some time now. And you can see I've got a little helper there on the right, lower right corner, who she likes to help me out, especially with now the pandemic and being at home so much. I think she's more excited than anybody that I'm at home for the most part. And then up in the top too, just one of the hobbies among things I like to do, try to have a little bit of work-life balance. Went on a hiking trip just recently, so put that up there. Actually from Maine, went up there, visited some family, did some hiking. So happened to get a few nice days of weather and took advantage of it. Let's talk about the first of the two topics, Wi-Fi security. little history of Wi-Fi first, just kind of where we came from, a few different choice items from the Wi-Fi world back in time. So you can see that Wi-Fi has been around for quite a while, and even further back than that, if you want to get into the physics topics of things, theorizing around transmission of radio waves. But some of the more recent stuff that we can look at here. And surprisingly, always to me, to look at these dates, particularly the 1997 and 1999 dates, that's really when a lot of the Wi-Fi that we're using today really started to come into play on a regular basis with different uses. Of course, the speeds, look at that, the 2 megabits and 11 megabits back then were a bit above that now, particularly with our internet connections and all that we can do now. But really, it has come quite a long way. With that, it's also brought in some different security challenges that come with that. So today, where we're at with things, we've got our wireless routers now typically support these two different types of frequencies, the 2.4 gigahertz and the 5 gigahertz. You might remember some of your early wireless routers with the 2.4 gigahertz. You turn on the microwave and suddenly your internet would stop working. And I remember that happening frequently. Some of the wireless routers now with some of the newer protocols have become a little bit more resilient to that. You may not notice it as much, but that 2.4 gigahertz is right around the same frequency that your microwave uses. So that was causing some issues. If you ever experienced that, that was why. Now with the 5 gigahertz, not so much interference there. And there's some combinations now with your wireless routers that transmit over both. So you might see, quite a bit of a jump in speed for certain things. And that is because if you have one of the newer wireless routers, it's utilizing both of those frequencies and allowing your device to use them both at the same time. I mentioned that the distances here because, and these are indoor distances. Mention these because from a security standpoint, it's worth considering if you think that your Wi-Fi isn't getting over to your neighbors or isn't getting over to your office space that's a shared office space with somebody else, whether it's on an upper floor, lower floor, or next to you. You'd be surprised with some of that, how far your Wi-Fi signal will travel. So just being in an enclosed space, just being a little bit away from someone doesn't mean that your wireless isn't visible in some way to them. And so we'll talk about some of the security capabilities that you can enable today that will help limit somebody from connecting there. Also too, you've got your mobile nowadays that does LTE primarily, and 5G is up and coming with some higher frequencies. Higher frequencies tend to allow for more data being transmitted through those higher frequencies. Higher frequencies, though, are sensitive to objects, and so that can cause limitations on how far that transmission can go. But that said, there's certainly other frequencies there. Mobile still supports some others, but those are kind of the two that are used in the majority sense nowadays, or at least LTE is, and 5G up and coming. If you've got one of the, you got to get a new phone and support that new radio frequency, but we'll all get there eventually. Wi-Fi security options, kind of listed top to bottom from the best to the worst. WPA3, you might see this on some of your new current day routers. It's an adjusted and improved protocol from WPA2 that is probably the more prevalent that's used out there today. Most of your current day routers would have WPA2, but you may be seeing WPA3 showing up on your wireless routers, and that would be the one to take advantage of if you can. WPA2 has some flaws with it that have been found, and so although still better than nothing. It does have some vulnerabilities that can be broken into depending on the scenario. Other older ones that really ought to be avoided entirely. Below that, WPA is an older, and also WEP is a very old technology for security. All of these, offer certainly some type of encryption with the data being transferred, and then a password that typically comes with these. But the problem with things like WEP is it's been so proven to be crackable now. Anybody can get into it really without too much effort. So it doesn't require a lot of sophistication. So it's almost as bad as having an open Wi-Fi. And the last one being open, you may see some circumstances where that's used. And so you just want to weigh that out. We'll talk about those more briefly here. But the other problem can be just that it's misconfigured. Somebody has it open and they really shouldn't have it open, but it is. Doesn't mean you want to necessarily jump onto it and start just using it. You want to be choosy with what Wi-Fi connections you make. There's some settings now with some of the, we'll get into this a little bit with the mobile, but while I'm thinking of it, with the Wi-Fi, you can tell it to simply just hop on whatever open Wi-Fi there is. You might want to think about that a little bit differently after we go through some of these different slides and talk over the risks of doing that. So we'll kind of go in reverse, talking about the open Wi-Fi first, and what does that look like? So open Wi-Fi being that there's no password to join the Wi-Fi. You can just pick it and it lets you join to it with no prompting. It's typically not encrypted and anybody can get on it, and that brings with it some risks. Some examples of open Wi-Fi that I'm sure you're familiar with. See some of these if you're traveling. Airports a lot of times now have free open Wi-Fi, and things like coffee shops, your Starbucks, etc. Usually those have little agreement windows where you've got to sign in. Don't be fooled that you're signing into a secure Wi-Fi. They're still open. What they're doing instead is having you go to a web page of theirs to agree not to abuse their Wi-Fi and use it maliciously, etc. Might have some disclaimers in there that they're maybe watching some of the usage of your traffic to see kind of where you're going, what you're doing. But those types of prompts to sign in, again, are not passwords like a secure Wi-Fi typically provides. They're just collecting information from you, getting some agreement that you're going to treat their Wi-Fi with some sort of respect, or maybe that's how they give you some type of access. Hotels and whatnot, they want to have your room number and that sort of thing, and that's just merely to verify you're a hotel guest. They're not real sophisticated ways of encrypting, securing that Wi-Fi. Just highlight that. Risks that can come with that, joining open Wi-Fis, you don't know who else is on the Wi-Fi with you. There's no control there of who's joining it. And that goes for, if you've got an open Wi-Fi that you've configured, whether at your home office or at your office, same thing there. Or if you're joining a Wi-Fi, you don't know who's on there. Somebody could have a virus on their computer, and it could be attempting to spread that virus to other vulnerable devices. So you really want to think about that before you go joining open Wi-Fi. There's some options, we'll talk about those shortly too, that you might be able to take to kind of help protect yourself when you're joining an open Wi-Fi, because I get it, they're all over the place, they're very handy. I use them at times, and it's just a useful way nowadays, it's so online all the time, but there's some steps you can take to help protect yourself there. And to the other risk, they're susceptible to traffic capture. So open Wi-Fi, again, no encryption, the radio signals that are being sent between your phone, your laptop to the Wi-Fi are wide open. So there's nothing stopping someone else from capturing all that traffic besides the Wi-Fi provider. somebody else could be capturing that and listening to the conversations that are happening between your computer and the other endpoint. So what you're doing when you get on the open Wi-Fi is, if you're not doing anything else, is you're totally dependent on the mobile app or the website that you're connecting to make sure that they're doing some sort of encryption between you and them to protect that. And you don't have a guarantee that they're necessarily going to do that. Certainly banking apps and those sorts of things are going to have that programmed in, built in. They're going to want to protect that information as best they can, but it's not always the case. Every single app you can't trust is necessarily going to set up that way. And so some of your data may still be susceptible to being captured, up to including usernames and passwords being sent back and forth. So it's a consideration when you join open Wi-Fi. So a couple of things you can do to help with that open Wi-Fi connection. Nowadays, there are a number of these VPN providers that are out there that you can load an app on your phone, load an app on your laptop, your mobile device, whatever, and secure your connection while you're on the open Wi-Fi. There's a few things to think about there with that. The VPN is not a typical VPN where you're connecting to an office, like your business office. So your VPN is good until you get to that VPN provider. They drop you out onto the internet, and then your traffic is no longer encrypted, at least by that VPN tunnel, when you're out of that VPN provider's connection. So it's secure until it isn't, is kind of the point. It's secure on your open Wi-Fi. It's secure going to that VPN provider, and then it goes into the open internet. And so just, again, something to think about, the data that's being transmitted and where it's secure and where it isn't. And then a little consideration for free VPNs. There's VPNs you can pay for, VPNs you can get for free. There are a number of them out there kind of competing with each other. And you want to think about those free VPNs that are out there and whether they're treating your data properly. So your VPN connection with these providers, you're sending all of your data through to them. And depending on how they're managing their systems and their security, they could be susceptible. Some of these VPN providers have had issues in the past. They pop into the news from time to time. And so it's good to consider whether you want to use a free VPN or if you want to get something that you can pay for, so that they're less apt to use your information in ways that benefit them. Rather, if you're paying and looking at their privacy agreements, those sorts of things before you pay, you can try to make sure that they're not using your data in some uninteresting way that you wouldn't want them to. HTTPS is kind of another. VPN is really the easiest way to secure all of your data that's running over that open Wi-Fi. HTTPS, SSL, there's different kind of terms, TLS now that are all kind of floating around in this space. Without getting into the weeds of that, it's just a secure connection that modern web browsers try to prefer when connecting to websites. Getting back to the banking websites, a lot of those all just force that nowadays anyway. So when you're logging into there, it's forced to be secure. But if you're on open Wi-Fi, something you want to pay attention to with, make sure you're up to date on all your patches, your latest browser version is up to date. Don't run old versions of browsers, and also check to see if you're connecting on an HTTPS type connection, because that's how you're going to ensure that username and password and all that data that's traveling back and forth, bank balances, healthcare information, etc., are all kept secure. Pay attention to when you're connecting on some of these open Wi-Fis. Look for prompts from your browser that tell you it's an insecure connection. It may still be HTTPS, but you get a prompt that says something's not trusted, something doesn't look good about this site. Take a pause and stop and see what is going on there. You could be running into an issue where someone is still trying to get in between you and that other site to be able to read the data. And they do that by meddling with the connection. And so it still looks like it's secure in some ways, but it's also broken, where essentially they're able to look at that traffic being communicated back and forth. So a couple of things to try there, you can pay attention to and use when you're on the open Wi-Fi. Talk about home Wi-Fi. Everybody's at home now, working in offices, still at home for a lot of folks, and so it's worth talking about here. Home Wi-Fi, one, you want to set a password. You don't want to have that open Wi-Fi configuration again, where the neighbors are hopping on or anybody can hop on, sort of thing. If you're going to set a password and configure your home Wi-Fi, really recommend that you go with that WPA2 or above. The WPA3 in some cases now being available, but less than that really isn't giving you a whole lot for security. And a couple other things around your home Wi-Fi that you can take advantage of now. If you get some of these different types of Wi-Fi routers, you can consider, you can set up a separate guest Wi-Fi. Separate guest Wi-Fi can be nice for guests, but it's also useful for things like these now very prevalent IoT devices, Internet of Things, the IoT there, and that can be a number of different devices. I'll talk about that shortly as well. But separating those off can be a good practice so that their vulnerabilities are not now brought into your more restricted network, where you've got your laptop, your home computer, your work computer, things that you don't want to be peppered by these devices potentially being vulnerable and take advantage of by hackers to then get into further parts of your network. Another option too, if you want to go extreme, you can put everything on guest. So you set up a guest network where nothing can talk to anything else on the network. Basically, it can just use the Wi-Fi to get to the internet. You do limit yourself some with that. Think about printers and things of that nature. You're not going to be able to necessarily easily print unless you're taking advantage of some cloud printing technology and that sort of thing, where your printer pulls printouts from the cloud. But otherwise, if you're printing locally, you might just give yourself a headache with this kind of setup. But it is an option if you really just want to isolate everything from everything else on the Wi-Fi. Again, only internet access. That way you're really limiting who can break into what and get access to what, just setting it up this way. So business Wi-Fi, couple things similar to home, if you're especially small business, keeping it simple and not technologically burdened with all kinds of administrative pieces here. You can use WPA2 or the WPA3. Your password, it's something to think about when you're setting your password up. If it's too short, WPA2 has some vulnerabilities around that have become known, and so having certainly a short password is not recommended. If you can make it more memorable, passphrases are things that are more useful. So you've got a sentence or a few different words in there with some spaces. Those are hard to crack, and the length is much more useful than having a short password with a bunch of scrambly characters and that sort of thing. So especially WPA2 with some of those vulnerabilities that are known now. As you get into the bigger businesses, you want to consider things around your wireless that maybe bring it to the next level. So requiring not just a password that everybody knows, but a username and password that is unique to the person. So they're hired, they use their username and password. If you've got a larger company network, again, you've got usually the capabilities to do this sort of thing, where you can set up a username and password that links to things like your Active Directory network and that sort of thing, that now when that person leaves the company, their account gets disabled, they don't have access anymore to the Wi-Fi either. Otherwise, you're changing your Wi-Fi password every few months because 10 people have left and everybody knows what it is, and you want to make sure that that they're not able to get in still from the parking lot. Also, you can consider splitting, and anybody can think about this where it makes sense, but consider splitting, particularly bigger businesses, splitting your Wi-Fi from your internal business network. You've got a lot of sensitive things in there on your internal network. You've got your servers, routers, all these different things that you don't want somebody poking at easily, again, from the parking lot. And so splitting the Wi-Fi off of that, Wi-Fi, a lot of people are just using Wi-Fi for internet access. If you're using things like, Office 365 and OneDrive, that stuff is all internet bound. And so you don't need somebody to necessarily get on the Wi-Fi and have access to your internal systems. So think about that. I might configure that separately. It's just an option. IoT on Wi-Fi, a little bit of on IoT. So Internet of Things, some of these different devices now, so many that can connect to your Wi-Fi. You probably recognize some of those. Yes, you can unlock and lock your doors with these. You can control your lights, power. There are refrigerators that get on IoT or get on Wi-Fi rather. Toilets, yes. Toilets, why? I don't know. It's an interesting one. But yes, they do have these different devices that are all able to connect in your vehicles to have Wi-Fi built into them. Ultimately through your apps and whatnot, you can connect to these. So there's a lot. And the more that there are, the more vulnerabilities there are to take advantage of with all these devices. So that goes back to what I was talking about earlier, where you set up a separate guest network for your IoT devices. You can connect all those to. They can't talk to anything else. They can talk to their internet cloud connection that they have with whoever the product is that you're using, and it works fine. But if they get compromised by separating them, they can't talk to other things on the network. Mobile app controls, a little blend with some of the mobile security side of things here, as Wi-Fi and mobile certainly have overlap. But just while we're here talking about IoT devices, it's worth mentioning so many of these have mobile app controls with them now, and you really want to take advantage of, if they're not forcing you to set it up, the MFA acronym, multi-factor authentication or two-factor authentication. Probably familiar with this from your banking sites. You get an email with a code, a text with a code. That's your MFA, and you can require that when you set up access to these different IoT portals. So if you get into your Nest app, you can tell it, look, I want you to also require a code if I'm signing in from a new device, new location. And so it'll prompt you for that extra code. Adds an additional bit of security. You've got, in the news, issues now with people getting into someone else's account, getting into their cameras. You've got your cameras, the Ring and those sorts of things on the front porch, the back porch, inside the house. And if there have been some kind of disturbing bits in the news of people getting into these, talking to the occupants in the house and that sort of thing, kind of disturbing. So by adding these additional password requirements, you help to protect control over those devices. And then auto updates are important. You don't necessarily get prompted to ask whether you want to have these devices auto update or not, but if they have the option, certainly leave those things enabled. Auto updates are helpful for the security patches. These sorts of things. Now, there's so many different devices. You're familiar with probably Windows updates or Mac updates, operating system type updates. All these devices have their own little tiny operating systems running that aren't the same as yours on your computer, but they have vulnerabilities as well. They need to get updated. So you don't want to disable that because again, now your device is out of date with a patch that fixed a update for a vulnerability, and somebody's into your system. So let those things update. A quick talk, I wanted to mention too, VPN tunneling, and kind of just give you a visual to distinguish the difference, because it gets a little muddled with the conversation. So VPN is kind of your VPN tunneling for your VPN apps. It's a little different when you think of that kind of VPN versus your VPN to get to your company network. Company network, you're pretty much solely connected to the one on the right here, solely connected from your VPN client on the far right, tunneling through to the company network on the far left in that graphic. VPN tunneling over on the left, this is more of your app that you're running, connecting to a VPN provider that drops you out onto the internet. So you can see you've got your device, you're connecting to that VPN shield in the middle. In this case, the VPN tunnel's created, but you do eventually jump back out onto the internet. So you're not protected all the way through, but in that, again, that open Wi-Fi scenario, somebody trying to capture that data now is unable to at that open Wi-Fi sort of situation. So just hopefully help to explain those two differences. Couple fun stories. Always like to throw these in with the Wi-Fi and just the sort of interesting things that can happen. So this one happened a little while ago, but a casino ended up getting broken into through their Wi-Fi, and it was because of a Wi-Fi device that was sitting in their fish tank, used to monitor, temperature, health of the fish tank, that sort of thing. Probably didn't think too much of it, setting it all up. Might have a neat app that can tell you how things are going in there, and that's all great until somebody's able to take advantage of the vulnerabilities in that device, then hopping into the Wi-Fi network, into the network of the casino. So this goes back to that point of separating your Wi-Fi, creating a guest Wi-Fi for those IoT devices, things that you just don't know and necessarily trust all that well. You want them to be on a separate network. Voice devices, so your Alexas, your Googles, whatnot, these things that sit on the counter and listen away to different things that you give them for commands. They're neat, they're fun. Not saying get rid of them, but some vulnerabilities that have been found with these. Now people, as they start to toy around with them, one of the shows I like listening to, the Smarter Every Day, Dustin on there showed how you can control Alexa with lasers, modulating the laser frequency. The Alexa interprets that as sound, and then Popular Mechanics did another bit on this with a bunch of other devices. They have a whole chart on their particular article of different devices and the success they had with aiming the laser and controlling it to talk to the essentially the voice activated device through laser control. You can issue commands now, unlock the door, that sort of thing. That was what the Smarter Everyday episode was about, was being able to send a controlled command to Alexa that was linked to a Wi-Fi device to unlock the door. So it's something to just ponder as you're setting up some of these different devices. I don't think everybody's going to necessarily be at risk of being broken into in their house, but ordering 500 pounds of dog food maybe is a joke. That sort of thing isn't necessarily going to happen either. But these are risks of these devices, and attacks will get more sophisticated as time goes on and people continue to play with them. So it's an interesting one to think of. We think only voice is the vulnerability of some of these. IoT Also light bulb vulnerabilities. So yes, you can control light bulbs now with phone apps, and it'll hop onto your Wi-Fi and you can dim the bulb and change the colors of the bulb and all these neat sort of things. But now you introduce some vulnerabilities there. So here, some researchers found a way to mess with the light bulb, essentially gaining access to them. They get booted off of your network. You unsuspectingly add them back onto your network. And by doing so, bring that vulnerability into play now on your Wi-Fi and physical network. So things to think about there. All right. Mobile security. I think we're doing all right on time here. Move along so I can hit some of those questions I see in the chat. Mobile security practices, screen locks are good. You want to do it. Set your, whether it's pins, patterns, biometrics, passwords, even, your different facial recognition. I know it's had some vulnerabilities, some with, the news stories of a kid unlocking his mom's phone, that sort of thing. They're still working to improve some of those. So I think we'll get there. But anything is better than nothing. And just being able to swipe your finger across the screen to get into your phone, it's not recommended. You want to put some kind of security on there. Passwords being probably one of the stronger, more guarantees to keep people out if you lose the device. Some of the others might be a little more guessable, depending. Pins, 11111, that type of stuff, 0000. Don't want to necessarily make it too easy for somebody. But you want to have some kind of screen lock on there. MDM is a mobile device management. So for your businesses, particularly larger businesses, if you've got a number of employees, you want to consider this for managing the devices that are connecting to your corporate data and downloading that data. So email, OneDrive, Google Docs, all of that stuff. It's going onto somebody's home or personal device potentially, and they leave the company. You have no way of managing that data. You have no way to ensure that that data is secure while they're even working at the company. So mobile device management gives you that ability. You can set things like policies, encryption, making sure that the password is strong enough so you can put minimum requirements. So no 6-character password, but yes, 8-character password, that sort of things. You can also do remote wipes. So somebody loses a device, that happens. Somebody has a device stolen or they leave the company, you can do a remote wipe. Also, containerization is another thing for some of the mobile device management tools out there. Containerization puts your company email it holds it just in the app. So the person that's using their phone now can only get at that data inside the app. And what that does is helps protect the data from being downloaded to a more public data space on the phone. And so that other apps can't use it. Other apps can't get at the data. It's contained. Also helps with easy remote wipe. Somebody leaves the company, you can just simply remove that app or remove the access to the data in that app, and the data is gone. And so they, for BYOD, bring your own device type plans that you want to have at your company, you can easily remove that data when someone leaves, and you don't ruin their phone. People get nervous, you're going to delete all their contacts, wipe their phone, that sort of thing. So the MDM helps with that, particularly around containerization. Some examples real quick, your G Suite, they've got some decent controls to be able to implement. So if you're using Gmail for your email provider, even though you've got a whatever domain.com type of setup, you can use G Suite, and it does come with some MDM capabilities. Office 365, Microsoft's version of the cloud Office realm that Google's been in, same kind of thing. They've got some tools to help with mobile device management for your company. And then there's third parties out there, a number of them that also offer some additional features that sometimes the G Suite or Office 365 don't necessarily meet if you're getting into a real specific scenario or want to control some things. So do a little shopping, see what's out there, but very helpful to control that data. Let's see, encryption. So encryption, most of your devices today have this. Now, if you've got a newer iPhone, newer Android, they're going to have some kind of encryption by default, and they're going to bug you to set a password, because that's part of the encryption component, is that it uses your password to unlock that encrypted data. So something to remember there that's important: you lose your password or forget your password, it's going to be hard to get at that data, because you don't have any other way to unlock that. That is how it's unlocked, is using your password as part of that encryption scheme. But still, older devices don't necessarily require this, and that's where some of the MDM and those sorts of things, the mobile device management, come into play to help you enforce encryption. Make sure that, hey, if you're going to allow corporate data onto a phone, it's got to be encrypted. Also, other things MDM was thinking of too, you can check older versions of phones that are susceptible to hacks. You can try to enforce newer versions of phones, make sure people are updating their phones, that sort of thing. But anyway, encryption is an important one that you want to have set up with your phone. Some other things you can do with your phone that, for the tinkerers, the tech, geeks, nerds, and whatever out there, you can do things like trying to root your phone. Some of the different providers have tried to get away from this some, but rooting your phone gives you some, feature access that you might not have as a normal phone user. Can be neat, can also be dangerous, because you can get into things that and settings that can ruin the ultimate underlying security of the device. Your MDM products out there, mobile device management products, typically have some type of detecting capabilities to see if a phone is rooted, and you want to watch out for those sorts of things, so that you can encourage or disable somebody's phone that has been rooted, again, because it introduces some security risks. Another thing kind of go along with rooting is side loading, where you can side load an app. So typically your apps are loaded through your app store, your Play Store, your iTunes, that sort of thing. Those companies try, they don't do it perfectly, but they do a pretty good job of trying to detect malicious apps, and then they remove them off of their app store, so you can't accidentally install something that is malicious. But side loading allows you to get around that, and as a user, not necessarily use the App Store to load an app. And so you want to pay attention to that too, as a corporate side, or just as a recommendation to, from myself, to not take advantage of that, leave it off. Because if you're side loading an app, it's not necessarily been vetted by the company, the Apple or Google. It's not been checked for security, and you're going to run into potential issues there. SMS attacks can happen too with your mobiles. These are kind of one of the other risks. You get a text, it's got a link, they want you to click on it. You've got a free Amazon card, your social security number has been compromised, you owe the Social Security office money, you've got a new car warranty that they're offering you. These are not links to follow. Just like with phishing to your email, you want to pay attention to these, train your users on these to stay away from them. Right, I see we've got 5 minutes left, so I'm going to go rapidly. Just got a couple more slides real quick. One on app security, and I'll get to your questions. So app security, you want to consider your applications on your phones. You can load apps that check your other apps to see if they're secure or not. And you also want to think about the type of apps you're using and where that application data is going. Could be going outside of the country, could be going to another country. That data you're putting in there, you're putting in your name. I got a scale one, so you put in your name, your age, your weight, and all this kind of stuff. And then you wonder, where does all this data go off to? So it's things to think about when you're using your applications on your phone. Where's that data go? Remote wipe features, MDM has this. You can remote wipe, I mentioned this before. You can also do it yourself if you're just an individual. You want to be able, you got to set it up before you lose your phone, but set this up. Google has it, Find My Phone, Apple has one too, and you can then go in, you lose your phone, you can go in and wipe it remotely. So that way you know that data is gone and not recoverable by somebody else that picks it up. Authenticator apps are good to use as well. So this helps with the multi-factor authentication. SMS and email codes are not ideal. And so where you can take advantage of these apps that you can load on your phone that give you a code to then put in with your username and password as you're logging in somewhere. Additionally, adding some security to your credentials as you're logging in somewhere. There's a few examples there. And then last, backups. We've got, think about your backups with your phone too. You've got contacts, photos, so much important stuff on there. You can use Google's backup for Androids. You can use Apple iCloud. Keep it on your space, of course. You can run out of space there and not be able to back your stuff up anymore. You think it's backing up. You can also back it up locally. There are a couple tools for that. Locally being to your PC. All right. I'm going to bring up the questions here and see, what do we have?
One question asks, it says, on my phone, I often see that I have a choice to use AT&T, Comcast, that's at my son's home, Verizon, or any number of retail locations. Which of these would you use first?
This is for connecting to a Wi-Fi type setup. I know there are those free ones out there, the AT&T and Comcast. They've been offering free access for a while with the pandemic and everything going on. I would try to stick with, I guess, the reputable ones. So Comcast, AT&T. Again, there might be open, so back to that open Wi-Fi set of points, reference those, but as long as they are reputable, they could be good. But too, somebody could set up if you're at someone's house, typically that's trusted. If you're out and about, that may or may not be ideal to connect to just an open Wi-Fi.
Thank you for that answer. Another question here says, how would you set up a separate guest Wi-Fi with your home router?
That's good question. So you could do it a couple different ways. Maybe the simplest would be to get a router that supports a guest Wi-Fi. So you can actually just enable it. You might even have it with your existing router. You can get into your router's configuration. Now, if you've got Wi-Fi through a provider like Comcast or somebody like that, they don't necessarily offer that. So you would have to probably purchase a separate Wi-Fi router to be able to take advantage of that. So it's, I guess, a good caveat there to keep in mind if you're using Wi-Fi through a provider's router, AT&T, Comcast, etc. Might be limited there. You might have to buy a device.
Thank you, Director Susan. That concludes the questions that are notated here in the chat. If there are any additional questions, please go ahead and take a moment to type those in. Here's one question, Director Susan. Generally speaking, what is more secure, an app or an HTTPS online login?
The HTTPS, I would say it kind of gives you a little bit more of a guarantee, because you don't know if the app is doing a secure connection or not. You have no way of really looking at that. I'd reference back to banking apps and those sort of things. Certainly they're going to set those up for certain, but other things you don't know for certain whether they're taking advantage of a secure protocol. So HTTPS is going to give you that guarantee.